All right, good morning, grade fives. I hope you're all doing well. This is going to be a recap of Term 2's history. So by now you would have been reading through these pages and doing the activities, and this is just something for you to look back on in order to help you to study for future exams and tests, and also just to refresh your memory. So firstly, when we look at farming, we first have to ask ourselves, what is farming? So farming is when we cultivate land or we produce cattle in order to either sustain ourselves, in order to eat, or to sell to make money. So firstly, we'll look at subsistence farming. So subsistence farming is when you farm for yourself and your family in order to survive. So if you look at these pictures here on the slide, you'll see there that there's a lady busy picking her own herbs and crops. There's a man using 2 ox in order to plow the land. And then there's a kraal with a few cattle that are inside there. And we'll be discussing this a bit later. But as we move on, I want you to think about the first African farmers, and when we get to there, they were these types of farmers. They were subsistence farmers, right, compared to commercial farmers. So the other type of farming being commercial farming, this is something that you'd probably seen going on holiday, maybe driving through the Free State or down to Durban. But this is when a farmer will use one type of crop and he will grow a lot of it on his land in order to make money. Okay, and this is not what the first African farmers were doing. This is more modern farming, and this is just because of the big population size in order to feed everyone. Okay, so those are the 2 types of farming. As we look at the first African farmers and where they came from, here's a map of Africa. So we know, and we've already learnt about the Khoi and the San that were here on the southern part of Africa, on the west side of Africa. They were in the Kalahari as well as Namibia. And we know that the San were nomads, and they would be moving around in order to find food. All right. And the Khoi were the first forms of farmers in southern Africa because they would start herding cattle and they'd keep a few sheep, etc. However, if we look at about 3,000 years ago, people in Central Africa, so this is Central Africa over here, and Western Africa, had already started with farming techniques. So they already had things like homesteads, etc. But they had to start finding new land. So they were moving down south because the land that they were cultivating vegetables and crops on had become unfertile. So they weren't able to grow anything anymore. So they had to find new land in order to farm. So they started to make their way south, and they traveled towards southern Africa, where they came into contact with the Khoi and the San, which we've already learnt about. So when they arrived and they met with the Khoi and the San, the interaction with the Khoi San, there was quite a bit of interaction between the two, and the farmers and the Khoi San people got along. The leaders of the African communities respected the San and hunter-gatherers as the first owners of the land, and they believed that the San had special powers in order they could bring certain things like rain and so on, because you remember we learnt about their spiritual beliefs and how they were going to trance and dance, etc.